what I know about Michael is that he really wants people to see how they can create um, gardens that help to manage the water on their properties. You know, it's up to all of us to manage the water flow that is on, you know, manage it where it drops. And Michael's a big proponent of us being able to do that ourselves. And that's what he'll be talking about today. And that's what he talks about in his book as well, which I'm sure he'll also be talking about today, but makes it very, very accessible, that any of us can do it, with just some key principles. And I think that's really important as we're looking at, like, how can we just do this ourselves as part of our garden, and how can we reshape things so that we can also manage the water. So I think I'm going to pass it on to Michael to talk more about what I'm trying to say. Okay, Michael.
Thanks, Jen. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for hosting this. I really missed the presenting and the connecting with people from 2020. So I'm so glad that we can do this here, and I'm glad that you invited me to speak, because as you guys know, and as you mentioned, the water and landscaping is something that I'm super passionate about. So it is a joy to spread the word. Now, as Bev mentioned in her talk, biodiversity and biomass are huge, which are two things that, if you follow my content at all, you know that I harp on that, and there's good reason for that. So let's get into it here. I have just a quick agenda. We're going to talk briefly about rainscaping, which is the overall kind of terminology for using the landscape to manage water. And specifically, we're going to talk about the rain garden, which is one of the mechanisms to manage water. There are many. Don't have enough time to go into all of them, but today we will get into rain gardens, which is kind of, you know, what I believe to be the best thing that you can do for your landscape. And that, I mean, I've done permeable driveways. I've done a whole lot of other things, but everything for me just keeps coming back to the rain garden. And when I first started in the industry, my focus was not really on plants. Of course, I had, you know, a love for plants, and I wanted to know about plants, but my focus was on absorbing water into the landscape. And the further I go down this road, the more I appreciate plants, because plants are the engine that drive the landscape. You cannot have a healthy landscape without a healthy variety of biodiversity and biomass. So while I focus a lot of my content on water, that is all made possible by plants. And the scrape and shape portion refers to the kind of the friendly method that I've coined for how I actually build rain gardens. And we'll talk in detail about the excavating versus scraping and shaping. It's actually the name of my book is Scrape, Shape, and Plant, because it was a question that I kept getting asked about, you know, how do you build rain gardens? Why do you do it this way? So I essentially wrote the book for, you know, for you guys to have a lot of those questions answered. And then of course, at the end, we'll get into planting, but I'm going to leave much of the plant talk to Charlie, because I'm going to stay in my lane here and talk about water, and let Charlie talk about plants. Okay, so I like to define rainscaping as landscaping that respects the natural water cycle. And the big three kind of components to managing water on the landscape: slow it down, spread it out, and then of course, soak it up. And this is a really useful infographic that I got from, I believe, Missouri Botanical Gardens. And this is kind of all of the elements around rainscaping that they talk about. And of course, today we're going to be talking about the rain garden specifically. So this, or a version of this graphic, is one that I have to include in all of my presentations, because it does a really good job of depicting the pre and post construction water regime. If you look at the photo on that's labeled before construction, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but the surface runoff arrow, if you notice how small this is, And then notice here how big these arrows are. Interflow and base flow are fancy terms for water moving through the soil. So notice the size of these arrows here. And if you translate it into an after construction photo, you can see how large this surface runoff arrow has gotten and how your groundwater or soil water arrows have shrunk. So essentially what we're trying to do in the rainscaping world is create our residential properties that still respect this water cycle. Okay, and you can see as we go from natural to suburban to urban, because it gets much more urban than this. I mean, there's still a good amount of green space here, and still this surface runoff arrow is large. So as it gets even more urban, the disparity between the natural water cycle and the built environment water cycle gets that much farther apart. And this is another very useful graphic that this was one of the first graphics for me that kind of really helped me understand how a residential property can create stormwater. And this is not meant to kind of shame people to say that if you own, a residential property that you're wrong for creating stormwater. It's really inevitable that some storms will produce some amount of stormwater, because that's just the way that our landscapes are built, our properties are built. At the end of the day, you have to prioritize keeping your home safe. I always say your landscape should absorb as much water as possible, but at the end of the day, I would rather have stormwater in the storm sewer than in your basement, right? So think about it that way. There is some amount of due diligence of keeping water on your property, but at the end of the day, that's what the storm sewer is for collecting that excess water. And this is also something I talk about a lot in the book as well. And of course, biodiversity and biomass are best health indicators. And this kind of came to me back in 2013. I was doing a semester at a European university on urban ecology. And every day, our professors were talking about biodiversity. Most of their studies were based on that. And you start to see a real correlation between the health of the ecosystem and the amount of biodiversity. And biomass also is the sum of all of the biotic activity. And that includes animals, insects, and below ground vegetation as well, because plants are like icebergs, and the vast majority of the plant network is underground. And that is where the soil building comes from, is the root mass. And I like to include this photo because, well, it's in Hamilton, and I'm wondering if anybody can kind of guess where this is. But I include it because I want to share with you guys what my ideal landscape looks like. Every time I look at this photo, I'm seeing a new plant, right? You see new drifts. You got a bit of a larger tree line in the back. You've got the goldenrod in the foreground. You've got, looks like it might be a New England aster down here. Some bird type situations, some grasses, some shrubs. So there's just a lot of different layers and a lot of different things going on there. And what you can't see in this photo is bare ground, because in nature, all of those little spaces are occupied by niche exploiters. So plants that find areas between plants, and now you get to explore a landscape that changes not only in space but in time. So this landscape is going to look a lot different in August than it will in even June, because as you can see, the goldenrod is in bloom here. So this would be like an August type landscape, August to September. And then the rain garden, the definition that I use is a three-pronged one. It's a shallow bowl-shaped planted area specifically designed to capture and infiltrate water. The soil, it's biologically active, it's well draining. When I talk about rain garden soil, I'm not talking about a sandy, gravelly soil. I'm talking about an organic, rich soil with lots of microbes and lots of plant roots. And of course, the native wildflowers, grasses, trees, and shrubs. And what vegetation is in your rain garden is completely dependent on the situation and what you like. There are some rain gardens where trees are appropriate, but if some people don't want trees in their rain garden for whatever reason, then you can do it. You can do it without trees. There is literally no limit to what a rain garden can offer you, just like there's no limit to what a regular garden can offer you. It's really customizable, and I enjoy giving people the control of, you know, take the reins on what plants you want in there. There's not a set of this plant has to go here, or that plant has to go there because of this, this, and this. You know, nature doesn't know at the end of the day, those little tags, the plant doesn't know where it is or what's on that tag. The plant only knows where it's growing. The plant only knows what's in its immediate area. Okay, and some graphics of rain gardens. This is one that I liked and I used to use a lot, and I still included it here because it is still one of my favorites. It's got, you know, the main components of the rain garden, the location, as you can see, it's not right up against the house. It's a ways away from the house, right? Because you are going to be actively infiltrating water into the ground. You don't want that immediately next to the house. It's got plant choices on it. It's got basin depth, which I refer to as ponding depth. So the basin there is essentially anywhere from when the rain garden is fully inundated with water to the bottom of the landscape. So that's kind of your basin depth, and then your soil amendment depth can vary. I prefer shallow rain gardens over something as this one says 1 to 3 feet. I personally think 1 to 3 feet is way too deep for a rain garden, because as Bev said, accept your soil, right? I'm a big fan of accepting your soil and work within those parameters. This is another one that I really like. What's labeled in this one that's not labeled in the other one are things like the inlet and the outlet. Of course, the inlet is where water gets in. The outlet is allowing a space for water to get out if it's full and still receiving water. And then there's also berms, which kind of work to contain water within the rain garden. Ponding depth, mulch, and amended soil. I do use mulch. The industry seems to be kind of moving away from mulch and into kind of the living mulch or the green mulch, which I'm a big fan of. But we have to remember the aspect of time here. It's very difficult to create a living mulch immediately, right? So in the interim, the traditional mulch, like a shredded hardwood mulch, can be used to help incubate the soil, to help discourage unwanted vegetation, and it can allow a little bit of a buffer time for the ground covering vegetation to establish themselves and to spread. And this is a graphic from my book, and these are ones that I draw myself. The lockdowns of 2020 kind of offered me the opportunity to have a little bit more office time, obviously. So I was able to finish that. And this is essentially the same rain garden, but one is a plan view, one is an elevation view. And it just shows the different aspects, the different zones. And it's also to show how water will be interacting with the soil. So there are some places where it will be dry. Atop the berms, you're probably looking at a situation that can be almost arid, right? And then on the slopes, it's going to be inundated with water or dry. And then the base is the area where, if it's receiving any water at all, that's when your base is going to be the first to receive water. So the two main approaches, and this is also something that I talk about in the book, and it's kind of something that I came up with based on the rain garden research that I do, and the other rain garden practitioners that I talk to. There seems to be two main approaches, but of course it's a spectrum. There's a gradient. Option one would be to excavate and replace, which basically operates under the assumption that a rain garden cannot exist in a native soil. You have to replace it with some sort of sandy, gravelly compost mix. And then the second option, which is accept the soil you have and work within those parameters. And of course, you can scrape it. You got to remove the vegetation, and you can add things, but it's not a replacement. It's more of an addition. And I'm definitely more on this side. Of course, my book being called Scrape shape and plant. It kind of goes without saying. But even to last year in 2020, when my team and I were building rain gardens, we were building gardens without adding any soil at all. So the only soil that was being removed, it wasn't even soil. It was like the top 2 inches of grass with the soil attached to it. We take that to a clean fill site. So it's not even like we're dumping it in the garbage. We're taking it to a soil recycler. And then all of the other soil that's under that, we just move it around. We shape it. It's basic earthworks. It's not like we're bringing in truckloads of new soil to build the rain garden. We're building the rain garden with what we have there. And we're using plants to change the composition of the soil over time, because as they grow, their roots extend down into the earth, and every year they will voluntarily kill off about anywhere from a third to half of their root mass, which then stays in the soil, decomposes, and not only does it add new avenues for water to infiltrate and percolate down, but it's now adding organic material into the soil, and it's creating things in the soil that other organisms can eat. And this here is one of the main reasons why I don't dig deep, I don't excavate, is because, as you can see, the darker the soil, the more organic material is in it. So your O and your A horizons, that is the first to go when you're replacing a soil. So now you're exposing a B horizon, which is typically very nutrient poor. And of course, the deeper down you go into the soil profile, the more compacted the soil becomes, because the weight of the soil above it is obviously compressing it with time. So just all of these things combined have showed me that it doesn't have to be a replace situation. It's work with what you have. And then this is something that I'm always reading rain garden articles. And one of the main beefs I have with rain gardens, if you will, is you could Google rain gardens and click the top 10 links, and they will all tell you 10 different things. But this is one that I can't give this presentation without saying, please don't do this, because I cannot imagine this being done by hand. I cannot imagine this being done for less than thousands of dollars. So you're thousands of dollars into this project, and you've got a hole in your backyard. And this is another graphic that I really, really like. And this is what I mean when I say you don't need to excavate, because the plants will do the digging for you. Look at how deep these roots go. We're looking at upwards of 10, 11, 12 feet here. And of course, on the far left, that's how the roots of your typical lawn will look. So most of the rain gardens that I build are built on top of pre-existing lawns. And people come to me and they say, in the spring, I have this patch of my lawn that is wet. So you need to build a pipe in the ground and take the water somewhere else. And my approach is, no, we need to build a garden there so that the water can get into the ground, right? It's not about moving the water somewhere else and translating problems throughout your landscape. It's about creating a situation where your soil is a sponge and it's absorbing water and growing biodiversity and biomass. So where to start? If you're looking to build a rain garden on your property, or you have clients that are considering rain gardens, where do you start? This is typically where I start. And what we're going to go over for the next few slides here is my personal property here in Hamilton. And this is a process that was actually started with Hamilton Naturalist Club back in, I think it was 2018. We had a group build here at my house where we actually built the rain garden in my front yard, which is one of the joys of my life, is being able to have that in my front yard and see it and tend to it. I'm going to make a great retired guy because I'm a big putterer. I love it out there. So as you can see, I just basically did a sketch of the elements throughout my landscape. You've got a shed, you've got a little, the previous owner had like a little vegetable garden here. You've got a deck, a cedar shrub, concrete sidewalk into a driveway, steps up to the front door, just a basic residential lawn with a tree. And then this is a fence where on the other side of the fence, the neighbors would store their, or the previous homeowners would store their garbages and whatnot. So now I'm saying, okay, in my ideal situation, what does that look like? The other thing I didn't point out is these red X's here are where the old downspouts were. So they were previously connected downspouts into those cast iron roof leaders. And as you can see, I was getting some water in my basement, and there was water all over the landscape right next to the house. So immediately I'm thinking, we have to get water further away from the house and into the ground, and not right beside my house into my basement. So we built a rain garden here in the front yard, and we went from 2 downspouts to 3, right? And that's the first thing I look at before I even look at the landscape is the age, size, condition, quality of the eaves troughs and downspouts. Because if you're looking to manage water on your landscape, it all originates from the roof. So what is your roof drainage arrangement like? And if it's time to replace them, or if it's getting time to replace them, I always encourage people to do that, because when you do that, now you have the opportunity to put the downspouts wherever you want. There's no set place where downspouts have to go. So we put a rain garden in the front yard, and we put a rain garden in the backyard here. We're going to go over the backyard first, and this is kind of right inside that fence where the previous homeowners were storing their garbages on those patio stones. And you can see it's raining and there's water on the sidewalk. Just looking at this photo gives me anxiety, even though this situation has already been solved. You can see as you're going out there, if this was your house, this is not a good situation to be in. Something has to be done here, or you're looking at a very expensive future. Okay, so this was kind of the first step, was to build up a little bit of a ledge wall here with just basic paver stones, so that we can create a low spot into the rain garden here. And this was just planted with a pollinator. It was actually a rain garden kit from Conservation Halton. I'm not sure if they still do that, but I've actually planted this at my house. I've actually planted the rain garden kit at customers' houses, and they work great. They have a team of specialists over there that know plants. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I'll buy it, I'll trust it, and everything has performed really well. And again, this was kind of into that same year. You can see things are developing. And I know what you're thinking. And yes, this little white metal fence is no longer there. That was not my choice. I'm not taking the fall for that. And then this is kind of what it looked like. I believe this is probably a 2019, the next year. It's been expanded a little bit. You can see things are starting to grow. That little white flower in the front, Canada anemone, which a lot of people have disdain for because it is rather aggressive. I use it for its aggressiveness. This is one of those plants that I would consider to be a great green mulch type plant, because it does spread very quickly, and it's also very low to the ground. So this is its maximum height here. It's not going to get much higher than 1.5 feet. And then behind it, the big guys can still come out, right? You've got goldenrod, vervain, eupatorium, lots of these guys that can emerge above it. So you've got your anemone on the bottom, and then all the other plants up above it. And again, this is probably another one from either 19 or 20, but you can see the anemone is spreading. There's purslane here that's spreading. And purslane is not one that I planted. It was a volunteer, but it's serving a function. It's a plant that is doing a job, and I'm okay with it. I would rather have a nice blanket of purslane than other undesirables that I have to take out here and there. And then onto the front yard. Here we are. You can see, notice how there's no downspouts in the area. This is still under the situation where the downspouts are connected into roof leaders at either side of the house. And I use paint at the beginning to kind of give a sense of where are the berms, where do I want the water to be ponding, where's the water going to get out if it has to get out. So if you can see my cursor, these here are the berms, right? These orange parts. And then inside this white part here is where the base or the ponding area is going to be. And then this here is, if it's full and still receiving water, we have an area for water to get out. So that's an overflow or an outlet situation. You can see the soil that was taken up from here was used to create these berms. So this was a garden that we built and sent 0 soil off-site, right? And again, this is what it looks like at the end of the day. Still no downspouts, but you can kind of see how it's bold in here. There's a place for water to get out. And then this is the next year. You can see the downspouts have been moved in, and the rocks are just there to prevent erosion, really. It's just something there to dissipate the force of the water as it comes in, because when it's really raining and you have water coming off a roof, it's coming out with some force. So if you don't have something there, it can really make a mess. And then as we go into the seasons, more plants are added. If I have extras from projects, 1 or 2, I'll throw them in my rain garden. Also, building rain gardens for other people has showed me, hey, I really like this plant, or I really like that plant, or this customer wanted this plant that I wasn't familiar with, so I'll buy a couple extra for myself and throw them in my rain garden. You can see there's blue stem in here, goldenrod, aster. I'm a huge fan of goldenrod. It's always one of the busiest pollinator-wise on my rain garden. And then, of course, when we talk about biodiversity, that also includes, cats, birds, squirrels, chipmunks, all that kind of stuff. There's always a function being served by all of these critters. And you can see, purple coneflower, I love. Cardinal flower, Liatris cardinalis. No, Lobelia cardinalis. One of those. Charlie knows. Charlie will tell you later. And there it is again, just other shots. And there's so many different views and different angles to look at. I mean, it really is never ending what you can do. And this is one that I was asked to include because it kind of draws a line between a pond and a rain garden. And when you hear me talk about rain gardens, you'll notice that I will never call it a rainwater garden, a water garden, or a pond garden, because those are all not what we're talking about. A rain garden is specifically designed to infiltrate water. So that means that you're not supposed to have water standing on the surface. And if you do have water standing on the surface, it should be infiltrated into the soil within 24 to about a maximum of 48 hours. As it's raining, you're going to have water on the surface. But if it hasn't rained in a week and you still have water on the surface, you've now crossed out of a rain garden into something like a pond or a bog type situation. So when we're trying to mimic the vegetation in a rain garden, we're not here on the open water side. We're not looking for submergence or even emergence. We're looking for plants that are more like that upland meadow type situation. So your coneflower, your goldenrod, your blue stems, your turtle heads. And turtle head is probably one that's on the wetter side of things. So that's one that's going to have to be planted in a base. If you plant a turtle head on a berm, it's probably going to struggle because it likes a little bit more moisture. So this is that rain garden area that we're talking about here. This seasonally wet or open water. And then planting. My thoughts on planting has really been shaped by a book that I read a couple of years ago. It's called Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Reiner and Claudia West. And of course, this isn't a book that I use as the only source of planting knowledge. It's not. I wouldn't consider it a planting Bible. But having said that, it's a really, really good resource for how to regard plants and planting if you're looking at mimicking a naturalized planting design. So what they use is 3 basic layers. They're looking at the structural layer, which would be things like your woody vegetation or your really tall perennials. And then the seasonal theme layers are kind of your more basic herbaceous perennials, right? Liatris and coneflower here being used as the seasonal theme. And then your ground covering layers or your functional layers. Sedges, clover, Canada anemone, these types of things that are filling all of the spaces in between and serving the function of incubating the soil, right? Providing structure for the other taller plants to grow, creating shelter for other critters, and really creating a dense root network underground, because not all roots are created equal. Some roots will be very bunchy and stay tightly packed together and extend down deep, and others will kind of extend out and find different spaces. So along with biodiversity above ground, the biodiversity below ground is also just as important. And then this is just a basic example of the kind of planting schedule that I would look at when designing a rain garden. And I have decided to break mine down into structural, seasonal theme, and then design or function layers, just because I really liked the way that they did it. It made sense to me. And I find it's a really good way of organizing plants, instead of organizing plants based on something like color or something more cosmetic like that. And I believe that was really all I had for you guys. Please follow me I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook. My book is also available, and I'm always available via email and phone as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. And so, see, I told you he would make it accessible. I was there on the day that we created the rain garden in the front yard. That was so fun. I mean, it's always fun working in somebody else's house than your house. So maybe you go and like create the garden at your buddy's place and then get your buddy to come and do it at your place. But we went from lawn to rain garden in like a morning.
Yeah,
So
there was lots of hands. It went
well, and yeah, there were lots of hands, but still it was, there were no machines. It was all mechanical, just shovels, and everything stayed on site. And I think that's a really important message, because I think lots of us in Hamilton don't have good soil or what people would consider as good soil. And I think it's important that we need to accept the soil that we have, because it's what we have. So we might as well work with it instead of trying to fix it. And I see that Bev and Charlie are working away at answering the questions. I don't. Were there any other questions that we wanted to ask for Michael now, or I think we have them all. So this is a good system that we're able to answer the question as we go.
Nice.
So thanks so much, Michael.
My pleasure. And yeah, to your point, Jen, even with just myself and 1 or 2 other people, we're building like standard residential rain gardens in a day. Like, it's not a week-long project with big heavy machinery. It's 3 guys and 9 hours worth of work.
And so for the rest of us, maybe it's a weekend of work, split up the 9 hours over your Saturday and Sunday. And so and then it looks like then the garden can be what it kind of, the plants need to suit the space, but it can be kind of what you want your garden to be. After you get the rainwater part done, then you can kind of build your garden for what suits you. So
absolutely.
And then the book is great. So you guys can contact Michael to get a copy of the book for yourself, and work with him to get a rain garden for your space.